It's time. After many requests, I want to cover one of my favorite superheroes, Deadpool. Now, this one's going to be a bit tricky as there are so many versions of Deadpool, but I'm going to try my best to tell you his main 616 version history. And honestly, we can probably eventually just make a whole playlist with all the extra versions and history of Deadpool there is out there. But I just want you guys to be aware that he's one of the most popular characters over at Marvel, and he's involved in everything, and has also been retconned multiple times using the excuse that he doesn't fully remember his past. So we're going to be doing a lot of story skimming here, and let me know any particular points that you want me to go deeper on one day. I'm also going to be covering some of his newer stories very shortly. Deadpool's real name is Wade Wilson. His childhood is mostly a mystery still, but we do know that his mother died from cancer and that his father was killed by one of his own friends when he was drunk. Shortly after that, he was kicked out of the Special Forces, so he joined up with Project X. Wade spent a good amount of time as a mercenary at this point, and he traveled the world completing jobs and falling in love. Eventually, his adventures would bring him back to the States where he discovered that he had cancer. He then broke it off with the girl he was dating and stopped his chemo treatments. He didn't want to drag things out any longer. Eventually, Wade found himself back in Canada where he was offered hope in the form of Department K. That's a special weapons branch of the Canadian government. It was here that he became a test subject for their Weapon X project, and he was implanted with the healing factor of another mutant, Wolverine. He was then sent into the field to work covertly since his healing factor didn't seem to work and they just wanted to kind of use him for something. That is, until he killed his own teammate. And it was then that Department K decided that he was a loose cannon and they sent him off to a hospice where they treated their failed experiments. What Department K didn't know is that there was a doctor at this hospice that was using the patients for his own little testing bed. He would have his workers place bets into the Deadpool, and they would bet on how long the patients would survive from his torture. The doctor would then torture Wade over and over for his own satisfaction, and eventually, Wade would form a romantic relationship with the cosmic entity known as Death. Wade then started trying to kill himself so that he could join Death, and he was doing this by taunting the doctors so that eventually they were so tired of him taunting them, they lobotomized Worm, Wade's only real friend at this time, as punishment, and Wade had to kill off Worm to end Worm's suffering. Now, one of the rules at this crazy hospice was that if a patient killed another patient, that patient would be executed. So, they tied Wade down and they cut his heart out of his chest. That was the end of Wade Wilson. Or so they thought. At this point, his healing factor finally kicked in, and it regenerated his entire heart right then, though it didn't fix all the other scarring from all of the other torture that had happened to him. Wade then killed everyone in the hospice except for the other patients, and he took the name Deadpool. He then set everyone free and went on his life as a mercenary. He eventually donned his costume and he began his freelance mercenary work. He worked for Hammerhead and Kingpin and even went back to the Canadian government for a bit. Eventually though, he took a job trying to kill Cable. And now this was the actual first appearance of Deadpool in comics. It was a rather awesome fight, but in the end, Deadpool lost to Cable and the New Mutants. And the New Mutants ended up being reformed as X-Force, and Deadpool started working with the members of that team off and on. After this, Deadpool would go on many more adventures, actually melding with one of his enemy's minds at one point as his healing factor merged the two of them together, and then he even teamed up with Cable for a good while. He was on his way to becoming a hero, but he quickly slipped back into being a badass mercenary when he attempted to kill Wolverine. But it turned out that the hit on Wolverine was planned by Wolverine, and Deadpool was just a pawn. Flash forward again to the Secret Invasion when the Skrulls tried to take over by taking over everyone's body. Wade was captured by the Skrulls so that they could try and copy his abilities. But when they tried to copy his abilities, it turned out that they also copied his insanity. Wade then got loose from their cells, and he quickly transmitted all of their intel to Nick Fury over at S.H.I.E.L.D. You see, he planned to get captured so that he could secretly save the day. Remember what I said when I was explaining Nick Fury about Nick Fury putting the right heroes in the right places? Well, he put Wade in there to get the info. But the info was intercepted by Norman Osborn, and because of this, Wade didn't get paid. Deadpool then went through another series of adventures where he lost his head, fought against the Thunderbolts, and was denounced as a traitor for joining the Skrulls, and he eventually ended up being a pirate on a tiny little pirate dinghy. This stint of adventures ended up with him trying to join the X-Men, but then getting blamed for a whole bunch of things and then clearing the X-Men's name. He then joins up with Wolverine in a Black Ops team known as X-Force, whose purpose is to get rid of the threats that can threaten mutant kind. During this adventure, the team actually kills Apocalypse, but then Apocalypse gets reincarnated as a child, and Deadpool has to go through one of his more mental qualms as he's trying to decide if he should kill Kid Apocalypse again. In the end, he ends up saving Kid Apocalypse, and they kind of become a bizarre pair of friends. And then during Fear itself, he actually steals a magical hammer belonging to some werewolf hunters, and he saved a small southern town. Next up, he tried to commit suicide, survived an atomic bomb, and he ended up fighting with the Hulk. This ended him up in a prison where he came across a crazy fan of his who was also his doctor. Long story short, she apparently was keeping pieces of him that had been cut off for years in her freezer. Once he confronted her, she committed suicide, and Deadpool nonchalantly threw his body parts in the dumpster outside. Now these bits began to thaw out and they became a more deformed and more deranged version of Deadpool. This Deadpool basically became known as Evil Deadpool. Captain America gets involved at this point and both he and Deadpool stop Evil Deadpool. But what they don't know is how they did it. You see, Deadpool was hit by an interesting dart that seemed to cure and heal him of his healing factor and all of his scars before actually killing him. Seeing that there is a way for him to finally be killed, Wade grabs the teleportation belt off of Evil Deadpool and he vanishes. Wade then begins a long plan to get X-Force, Wolverine, and his own lackeys, including Hydra Bob, to help him get the serum into his own system so that he can die and finally be with death. Eventually, after a whole crap ton of things happen, Hydra Bomb gets him the serum and he injects himself, curing his facial scars and making him a regular person again. But then he decides, after Hydra Bomb talks to him, not to kill himself. More adventures ensue, with Wade not having a healing factor and him having to relearn all of his skills since he was so dependent upon his healing factor to save him. And he ends up being hunted by a crippled S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who blames him for being crippled. It turns out that in one of his earliest adventures, he destroyed an entire building that she was in, and this is what put her in her wheelchair. Well, this entire adventure ends with Deadpool running into the Evil Deadpool again, and he finds out, hey buddy, the serum was only temporary. And knowing that he's going to heal back eventually anyway, Wade lets the crippled S.H.I.E.L.D. agent get her revenge. And this is where Deadpool ended his run before the Marvel Now run. And I think I'm going to be doing the Marvel Now run stories in full and not skim over them. But after reviving once again, Deadpool has fought against zombie versions of all of the United States presidents, discovered that he has had a daughter, and he saved a series of Korean prisoners who were getting tested on with all of his healing abilities. And eventually, he has to travel through the multiverse, fighting against his own evil versions known as Dreadpool. He's a massively popular character who pops up all over the place, and while he's never had a movie of his own, we did recently see his teaser trailer get leaked out. His powers are regeneration, and his regeneration is so strong that it makes him immortal. He also has superhuman strength, stamina, agility, reflexes, and speed. He also talks to himself to resolve a lot of his own issues. Now, during one of the comics runs, he was actually talking to the yellow boxes in his head, and it was revealed recently that this was apparently another crazy character in the Marvel Universe that had a healing factor. When the two of them died next to each other, they melded into one person, and that was Deadpool, and that the yellow boxes were actually this other individual. Recently in an annual, that person was pulled out of Deadpool, and that's why we don't have the yellow boxes anymore. Oh, and apparently he's now married to Dracula's bride. I've got those books, just haven't really gone through it yet. Lastly, what some people consider a power and some people just consider a cool narrative is the fact that he has the ability to break the fourth wall. Basically, he knows that he's in a comic book, movie, and video game, or whatever he's in, and he'll talk to us directly. And that's one of the coolest things about Deadpool. He knows what's going on. Now, very soon we're going to be covering a lot more Deadpool stories from Marvel Now, and the Deadpool Kills Deadpool series, and Deadpool Kills Marvel Universe, and Deadpool Kills the Universe, and Deadpool Kills whatever else I can find. So I hope you guys stick around, and if you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and I'll talk to you guys next time right here at Comicstorian.